Good morning.
Al, are you a morning person? Because it's earlier for you than it is for us.
No, I am not a morning person. So this is a commitment, yo. This is a commitment.
This is a labor of love. Thank you so much, man, for getting up early and getting with us.
The grass withers, the flower fades, but Nurch and Ichabod is here forever. Huh?
Or as long as the internet lasts.
Bringing in up old tin lines. Great, man.
Well, I mean,
let me go grab this link so I can take it to my Facebook real quick. Yeah.
drop it.
We do this every other week, but it feels like a month has gone by.
I know, it feels longer. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Well, Brady, a lot happens between nurtures for sure. We have two exit strategies at least, and sometimes you have an additional thing happening. So yeah, you know, there's probably at least 3 episodes in between each Nurch.
Yeah, you're right about that. You're right about that. And then there's just so much life to live. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The Lord is not adding to our number daily, such as should be saved, but we're growing slowly.
I got some comments that I want to read in a minute, but we'll give people a chance to get in and take a seat and greet your neighbors in reason's name. Exactly.
I thought you missed that. That's why I said it.
I always give a little pause. I give those pauses for effect because I want people to have the old memory trigger, and then by the time it triggers in their mind, I hit them with the twist.
I like that.
You could run the old Dr. Umar where you just keep repeating a thing over and over again. I don't know if you've seen that. That's his tactic.
I've never really.
He just repeats. He's full of nonsense.
That's ridiculous.
he might actually be a fun guy to pull out and just examine some of his reasoning one of these days, because he's a pretty popular. Yeah, he's a pretty popular guy on TikTok and Twitter. Mostly, I think he's one of those guys you wonder, are they laughing with him or at him? And sometimes I think it's a little of both. You know?
Well, see, because I know him from the memes, I always get the sense that people are laughing mostly at him, though I know there are a few diehards that are with him. You can't be as popular as he is and not have people actually be with you. So
no, people really rock with him, but they also laugh at him, and I think it's one of these. It's like he's cannibalizing himself in a sense, in that I think he picked up on the fact that people think he's a funny guy. And now he's just like, all right, I'm just going to make that my whole personality. He's just going to make it his thing. Yeah.
For sure. Kind of accepting it and then running with it. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think he realized that it gives him a certain kind of clout on the internet. It gives him these viral moments when people think he's funny. So they keep reposting. And so he's using it. Man, he's like the ultimate grifter, though. When you look into his story, he's
right.
You know.
Yeah.
Many of these church guys. I mean, I mention Vadi Bakum, another grifter. One of these days we got to do a deep dive into his whole grift.
I was just sitting there thinking we did Billy Carson. This week coming up, we're going to touch on another person who's, I don't know about financially grifting, but he definitely is socially grifting. We're going to talk about. I'll save it for Tuesday. But then when you talk about Vadi Bakum, yeah, we probably should do a series of grifters, and because you know what? Here's what we're going to talk about Tuesday. Just a little preview commercial. I want to talk about the religious mind versus the scientific mind, so that even if you're not specifically dealing with religion, there's a way that people tend to think that makes you susceptible to not just religious claims, but I don't care if it's a Terrence Howard or a Vadi Bakum or whoever it is, it's a kind of thinking that makes you susceptible to that. So that's what we're going to touch on Tuesday.
Yep. You got Coleman Hughes, You got what's his face? Thomas Sowell. I want us to we have to do subdivisions of grifting though. Like there's the whole black guy shield for white racism. Coleman Hughes, Thomas Sowell. There's some guy like there are black guys who know I'm saying what you couldn't say because people would just envision you with a Klan phone hat on. It's like a Klan hood on, essentially. But because you have me in front of you, come on here, he's the federal head for the racists. Like because you have me in front of you, and I'm a black guy. I'm body Bacham, I'm Coleman Hughes, I'm Thomas Sowell. You can get off like you're jumping up behind the giant. Yeah, tell him. And the giant's in front, and it's the black guy, and he's like, yeah, it's all, this red line and stuff is all for the birds. Like, police brutality is not a thing, et cetera. Then in back of you, a bunch of white racists jumping up and down. Yeah, get at him, tell him, so,
that's an episode.
I think that, So, yeah, we have to address, and I guess to make it relevant to Ichabod, you could just show how it is a thing in the church, like where you find, and if a black guy is enterprising enough, he will see, look, it's like the minstrels in the minstrel days who would wear the black face, but they were black guys. And they were like, hey, I might be ostracized by the black community, but I still get this cash, I get to get that Luciano or whatever.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna share. I'm trying to think which one I want to share first. There's a few comments that popped up on previous episodes that I want to read real quick. So I'll pull up this one here, and we can. I'm going to go with this one first. And I want you guys to speak to this. All right. Tell me if this guy does he? I think he's speaking to you guys. Tell me what you think. I think he nails it. Who is this? He says I am the possible.
I am the possible.
I am the possible. Commented on the episode, and he says, talking to me, Al, and Jay Witt, he says, you three are so captivated by God, which is awesome to watch, that you can't stop talking about God. These convos don't prove to me that you all don't believe in God. It actually reveals just how much you do. Y'all gonna mess around and talk yourselves back into acknowledging what you already know and believe in your heart of hearts. There is a God. Peace.
It brings to mind the Arsenio Hall quote from Coming to America with the Hugh Hefner on high. There is a God somewhere. No, man.
Is he speaking to you guys? Did he nail you?
I have one other person in my life who talks to me this way, and you almost get the feeling like, oh, we gotcha. It has that gotcha feeling. This is ridiculous. I don't know.
It's ridiculous,
wait, I was gonna ask really quick. Like, do you think that what's like? It's passive aggressiveness, right? That's how I feel.
Well, he's trying to say we're being passive aggressive. We're acting like we don't believe, but the fact that we're on here every other Sunday, and like Jay Witt said, 2 times in between that, we're on Tuesdays. This is evidence that, come on, guys, why would you still be talking about this if you don't believe? Come on now.
Yeah, he strikes me as the guy who, no matter what you say you believe, he's going to be like, he's going to say you believe. It's one of those things where it's, thou doth protest too much. He's trying to use that against us. So, hey, my take on that is if I'm the believer, as sacrilegious as I can be, then I guess everybody's a believer. Like if that's your take, everybody's a believer. You know what I mean? So there's a universal atonement, basically.
Yeah.
So I guess that's his position.
I get this on Facebook all the time. People telling me, at least 2 or 3 times a week, somebody's talking about, the fact that I'm still talking about God. They use this analogy You sound like the guy who broke up with his ex-girlfriend, but can't stop thinking about it. That's why you're always talking about God. I'm like, I don't understand how you don't understand that I'm not fixated on God. If anything, I'm obsessed with you all. Like, I keep bringing up God because I'm trying to rescue you all from this illusion. I'm trying to dissuade you from giving your life to somebody else's fantasy. That's the only reason. And because I have to live in a world with you all. So I don't want to be walking around having to share, having to vote with and having to fight with and live with people who are living according to non-reality. I'm trying to pull you into
Yeah.
reality. And so to do that, I've got to address your non-reality. That's the only reason why I'm talking about it so much. If I could put you on an island or be on my own island, I wouldn't have a thought or a care about this God that you keep bringing up. But because we're in the same... Yeah,
let's do the logic though. Let's do the logic. By this guy's standards, the whole enterprise of debunking things, which it happens in every field, it would be rendered obsolete by this guy's standards, because there are people in almost every field that devote themselves to correcting and debunking bad trains of thought and belief. You couldn't critique anything. You wouldn't have any, by his standards, people who critique Donald Trump since he's in the news. They actually believe Donald Trump because they can't stop talking about him. You see what I mean? So like, even this guy who's saying this isn't consistent. Nobody is consistent with that kind of standard for you believe a thing, because in life, there's constantly somebody presenting another view as being false. And it is for some it's an actual occupation. They make a living debunking things. Does that mean that you have to believe everything that you debunk? Does that mean for every scientist that I follow on TikTok who talks about biology and talks about evolution, does that mean that they're anti evolution because they are debunking like religious people who believe that the earth is only 7,000 or 10,000 years old? No. It's just a ridiculous proposition. But what it is, it's a way of saying nah. Like, it's like being at the playground and somebody says something to you and you say, no, that's you, you're it. And it's like, all right, well, okay, whatever. That's such a puerile mindset to have,
It's puerile, but he's also using the relationship analogy, and that's actually the wrong analogy to make. Like, that's not, this is a lot more bigger and complicated, and deals with issues that you have to think deeply about. Because God doesn't exist. I mean, So
let me share one more, because that one didn't get you guys going like I thought it would. I thought it would speak to your hearts.
Kind of did.
Here's another one. We're not even going to talk about his idea of what's really happening in our hearts, the idea that they know our hearts better than we do because an ancient book told them. That is, we're not even going to deal with that, even though I kind of just sneakily did. But this one, I think, will speak more to your hearts. I like the fact that what we do on this channel is we kind of give people tools for unpacking and unthinking, critically thinking about the things that they used to just blindly accept as believers. And so this person made a comment basically saying, now that you guys have kind of taken apart this part of Paul's argument here and this part of I can sort of use that to go back to another part of the Bible and say, yo, it was even happening here. So check out this comment. This is from TM 2086. Says, I just realized how perfectly the autographer, the person who actually is writing the scriptures that we're reading, how perfectly the autographer excuse. And if anybody's lost by what that even means, we did an episode talking about how the idea of biblical inerrancy, that the Bible has no errors. We did an episode talking about
exit strategy.
Yeah, we did an episode talking about how that excuse only applies to the original autographs written by the autographer. Nobody who thinks the Bible is inerrant uses that to refer to your King James or your NIV or your ESV. They say, no, that only applies to the autographer, which means, well, no, we don't have an inerrant Bible today, but what they had back in the original, that was inerrant. The first time they wrote it was inerrant. Well, this person commenting says, I just
Trickle down inerrancy.
What trickle down inerrancy, but by the time it gets to the versions that we have, the unspoken admission is by the time it trickles down to the versions that we have, it's not inerrant anymore. It's no longer.
Right.
So look, here's what the commenter said though. The commenter said, I just realized how perfectly the autographer excuse lines up with Moses smashing the first tablets that God wrote and had to rewrite them again by hand himself. Now think about how beautiful this is. Like, you understand what this commenter is saying, right? If you're out there watching, think for yourself for a minute. What is this commenter actually saying? Think about the autographer.
This is deep.
Yeah, think about the autographer. Only the original versions were inerrant. This person says, yo, this goes back to the whole thing with Moses and God writing the 10 Commandments with his finger. Think about what he's saying for a minute, y'all. Just give us a second. Think about that. And you put it together. I hope you can. Because, Jay Witt, you said this when we were talking about this. You said, imagine the impact it would have if we really did have stone tablets that were written by the actual finger of God. Imagine if we still had those, if Moses never smashed those in the story. And today, thousands of years later, you can still go back and say, see, nothing that we know of in the universe could have made this kind of imprint in this stone. Well, show it to us then. Moses smashed them. So he had to write them over by hand. It's like, wait, what? What? This is
the perfect analogy. Yeah.
The perfect excuse.
Like literally.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Like the Bible is great at setting up a miracle or whatever, and then breaking the mold.
Exactly.
Like literally breaking the mold
Literally
that it was made.
Yeah.
It's like, so you can't go back and authenticate what it is that you're supposed to have. You just have to take their word for it that, yes, this happened and was fashioned by God, or it was done by God. But it's like, and you even include in the story the excuse for why they can't. It's like, hey,
ideology.
God
the word we love on this channel, ideology.
Ideology.
Yeah, like, I mean, I know they say the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands, but there's something about having the actual stone tablet where you can say, look, and this is where I mean, he sets the precedent with that story for you're never going to get direct something straight from God. He's going to always have an intermediary, you know?
Yeah.
And you would think that that's like the lowest standard that you could have, right? To actually proclaim that what you have is divine. It's like, because if the real tablets were here, I mean, there's another test that it has to pass, right? And it wouldn't be able to pass that either. You know, that's the higher level. But like at a minimum, right, we should be having the original stone tablets. That's exactly right. Or the original.
You got to respect Islam. You got to respect Islam on some level, and I say that a little tongue in cheek, because at least they have supposedly like a physical rock or something. You know what I mean? That they have to go there. They have the Kaaba. They have things that and I think that's part of the strength of their faith, is that they have that for themselves. They're like, yo, look, you got to come to Mecca and you can come where this is at. At least now granted, it's still behind a building, like, right? Like, and we go to Mecca, like whatever is in it is encased inside of a building. But at least they try to pretend that there's something here. You know what I mean? Whatever. For all that's worth.
There's a few of you in the chat who are faithful friends of the channel. So I threw you guys a wrench just in case there's anybody in the comments who starts causing a little bit of a ruckus. You can.
We forgot to say like, subscribe, right?
That too.
Yes, indeed. If you are here, take a second to like. Take a second to subscribe. If you're not subscribed, maybe do it now. If you like, just make a nice comment in the actual video, or you can come back through as we get into the content. But yeah, if
super chat.
You can definitely super chat. We appreciate gifts of all sizes. But your super chats, $5, $10, whatever you want to give, $20, it'll help us do what we're doing and keep doing what we're doing better. Also, a little bit more house cleaning. I put about 6 new episodes up on the DSP. So if you are saying, hey, get this on Spotify, get this on Apple, just put 6 new episodes up on there, and more coming. So we're going to be feeding the audio listeners as we keep it moving. All right. Y'all ready to dive in here?
Let's do it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we are in Romans chapter 7, but before we go on to Romans chapter 7, I want to go back and look at Romans chapter 6 and just kind of look at what we've done so far, what we've seen so far. So just kind of go with us as we kind of look back. What we've been looking at is we talked about Paul's silly syllogisms. I'm gonna share something real quick. I just want you guys to think with us about how Paul's been giving us these arguments for what we should think about faith, what we should think about righteousness, what we should think about sin, what we should think about humanity, what we should think about God's revelation, what we should think about who's guilty before God. And ultimately what Paul has been trying to show you is who is in need of this brand new salvation package that he came in town to sell. So I'm going to pull up something and I want you to just, I'm going to ask Al to see if you get with this syllogism or see what you would do if this was you making the syllogism here. All right. So I'll share the screen. And if I showed you this, what would you think? How would you complete this? This is Romans chapter 6. If I said, hey, you were a slave to sin and that leads to death. And you were like, okay. And I said, but if you're a slave to obedience, that would lead to, what would you think this syllogism would end with?
Freedom will be, I mean, if you're saying judging it based on the left.
Yeah, well, you're still going to be a slave either way. But here, being a slave to sin led to death. Here, being a slave to obedience would lead
obedience, leads to more slavery. Based on
you're thinking you're thinking with you. You're thinking you're thinking with
like show the asymmetry, mind. Albert, show the asymmetry of it. Like when you look at this, what's the
see, Al's thinking with his deconverted mind already. I don't want you to go there yet. You're an Ichabod mode.
I'm just telling you, Al, to look at it and find it. Go ahead.
Find the asymmetry here.
No.
Yeah.
No, you're doing something different, Jay. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.
No.
I'm just simply asking if you just saw, if I was setting up a syllogism. Let me just say this for anybody watching. This is proof that we don't rehearse this. Like we're coming in cold. I just thought of an exercise that I thought might actually make a point, and I'm just trying to get you to think without trying to take anything apart yet. If I just showed you the left side,
I don't want to answer it, but I know the answer. But
we'll just say life. Yes,
that's exactly that's. Okay. If I just showed you this without trying to get you to deconstruct it, if I wanted you to help me to construct this, you would think slave to sin leads to death. Okay, well then slave to obedience, he must be getting ready to say it leads to life. But he doesn't do that. He does something else. He says, I'm having it up on the screen here for you. He says, no, if you were a slave to sin and that led to death, if you're a slave to obedience, that will lead to righteousness.
No, this is great, Brady. Yeah.
Now reading this, you've got to think to yourself, okay, I guess, but why not just say life? Why not just why do this? Right? There's something that is asymmetrical here. That's what I was getting to, Jay, when I said, don't do that yet. I want to show, now we're getting to the asymmetrical. Being a slave to sin leads to death. Being a slave to obedience leads to righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
Does that just feel a little off to you, to either of you?
I think go ahead, Brady. Jay, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, well, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I was about to say the others. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
listening.
no. Just I guess for the audience's benefit, I mean, the last Nurch we had, we examined Paul trying to bring in this kind of symmetrical Platonic structure to
Hmm.
this as a way to argue. But as we begin to unpack it, yeah, it's like, is it really symmetrical conceptually, right?
Right.
Because we have, we have major, like we have a major premise that's happening here, right? We have slave, then he argues, therefore sin, which could be argued as a minor premise, then our conclusion. So if we want to be able to structure this or stack this, like, yeah, this makes no sense. It's almost like Paul's running with, he's excited,
No, I
he's
agree.
stimulated. Yeah, like these thought experiments that he's doing
Mm,
almost. He doesn't even
yeah.
realize he's doing it, maybe.
As
But
I was doing
but
this, I thought to myself,
yeah.
if he had the, like, come on, you're writing with a stylus and if you had the ability to just hit the delete key and just go back and say, oh, you know what? I could edit that and change. He might have made a better syllogism, but I don't
Yeah.
know how much
No,
time. Well, go ahead, Joe.
no, because I have a thought. Put that back on the screen if you can,
Okay,
so just so people can see what I'm saying. Please, please,
yep, it's coming.
because the thought I have is related to the visual you had there. All
Hmm.
right. The premise of this, he's establishing the premise for chapter 7 here,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And when you look at it, he's in 7, he gets heavily into why he's being disobedient, right? Or unrighteous.
Hmm.
And so
Right.
so what's going on here is he's trying to establish a paradigm for living a righteous life. But if you look at this, the parallel here should be slave, slave, right?
Hmm.
Sin, righteousness,
Hmm.
death, life.
Exactly.
But because he's actually building an argument for chapter 7, where
Right.
he's trying to show you how to get to righteousness, he can't put righteousness as being parallel to sin, because then that would defeat the whole
Yeah.
purpose. He's setting a premise for chapter 7, and
Exactly.
he's trying to show you. And the reason why he can't, it has to be this way, is because he can't claim that for his audience. He knows his audience isn't going to be righteous. And so there's going to be some discontinuity. He's claiming you're a slave now to obedience, which is basically his surrogate for righteousness there, but you're not righteous.
Hold on,
So
hold
he
on.
has to take.
You said obedience is his surrogate for righteousness. But then
Mhm.
if it's a surrogate for righteousness, then it's synonymous to righteousness. So being a
Yeah,
slave
yeah.
to, you know what I mean? So obedience and righteousness, you basically have them there twice.
They're almost synonyms.
Exactly.
Yes,
Right.
yes. They're almost synonyms.
Right.
It's
But
a
he
bit of
can't,
a tautology.
it's a tautology. But he can't do that because he already used the word before this in verse 16. He says, or 15, he says, whatever you are obedient to, you become a slave to. So you actually are
But
already
this is
obedient to sin.
But the main point I'm trying to drive home is this is necessitated not by the theology or the logic, but by experience. He knows his audience isn't righteous. So
Mhm.
he's actually offering up an apologetic for the fact that they're not
Yeah.
Yeah.
righteous.
And
And so if he puts,
no, go ahead, because I'm saying we're going to get deeper into that in chapter 7. But go
Hmm.
ahead.
so if righteousness followed and paralleled sin, which it should have in the argument, it would have life would be the only next step.
Right.
But because he knows that his audience doesn't already have the righteousness, he has to put another step in there. So he's left a little wiggle room, just like when you were a child and you bought shoes, but because your feet are growing, you need a little space in the shoe so that your foot can grow in. He's left enough wiggle room in the argument to kind of leave righteousness at the end of
Well,
it instead of in the middle.
let me show you how he kind of messes up his own wiggle room then, because he goes further with this. Where's my all right, here it is. A few more slides real quick before we go into chapter 7. He does this here where he says in verse 16, you are now slaves of obedience. Verse 17, he says, you are now slaves of righteousness. So he almost shows his hand and
Yeah.
uses the two uses the two
synonymously.
synonymously. So you say your slaves to obedience, your slaves to righteousness, and it's almost like, you people love bomb you, and they say it's sort of toxic to love bomb people because you give them all these good vibes that you can't sustain, but you're really just doing that because you're trying to overwhelm them with this love. Well, what Paul is doing here is he's sort of word bombing you or concept bombing you by giving you all these concepts that you're almost like, wait, I thought you were going to say life there. Oh, wait, I thought you were going to say righteousness. Oh, wait, I thought you were going to, but you're throwing all these concepts at the person who it's almost like, because it's so illogical, it almost forces you to say, damn, I would have said life there. I would have said righteousness there. I would have made this part of it.
It's Terrence Howard. It's Terrence Howard.
Explain what you mean, because I was going to take a long time to say it, but explain what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, Terrence Howard has these sentences that he utters, and they'll have a couple of multisyllabic $3 words and whatever. Right. But like when you actually lay it out on the chalkboard, the sentence is utterly incoherent.
Exactly.
But I watched guys from the Joe Rogan podcast who I'm not gonna. I watched them sitting down talking about what Terrence was saying, and if you don't even have to be particularly scientifically literate to just hear what he's saying if you know enough about language to know that he's not making any sense.
Right.
But some people ascribe to things that they don't understand. If it sounds like it's over their head, they literally jump to genius. They'll say, this guy's a genius. And it's like, all you're revealing. So a lot of things reveal more about you than it does about the thing that you're talking about. So when you hear somebody talking gibberish and you say, oh, he's a genius, all you do is show yourself to be a person who's unlearned.
And what the Bible is interested in is you leaning not to your own understanding. Because if you lean on your own understanding, you say, wait, this does not make sense. But if you're not... If you're being conditioned to, well, if it doesn't make sense to me, that's probably a sign of its geniusness, because the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men, and God uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. So if this sounds foolish to me, then it probably is the wisdom of God. This is the scam of what's happening in this passage here.
Yeah, and it's wild because Paul often presents himself as not coming with man's wisdom, but when you listen to or you read what he's saying, there's all kinds of sophistry and nonsense going on in his he's talking in circles. I mean, he's Terrence Howard. He's the Terrence Howard of the canon.
Somebody in the comments said he was the Deepak Chopra of his time.
Absolutely.
Here goes the last silly syllogism before we go to chapter 7. Paul says in verse 22, righteousness, and this is almost where you start saying, wait a minute, Paul, this almost begins to sound like there's a way to work yourself into salvation, because if we become slaves to righteousness and it yields sanctification, and then you say sanctification yields eternal life, then isn't our righteousness the road to eternal life via the sanctification? But then he gets to the end of verse 23 and says, eternal life is a free gift. So at some point you got to stop and say, wait, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
You don't need to be a slave to righteousness. The fruit of that is sanctification, and the fruit of sanctification is eternal life, but eternal life is a free gift. Those things are not congruous.
Yeah, he's the king of he's the king of corollary non sequiturs. He's the king of it.
Corollary non sequiturs.
He's the king of it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is describing how like a person comes into it's all about actually it's work based. Actually, this is all work based, and then all of a sudden at the end he just throws this like curveball at you, saying, "Oh, but yeah, but it's a free gift." It's like, okay.
Well, if you ever wonder why we have so many denominations, and why you could write a book called Four Views on Sanctification, or Four Views on Eternal Security, or Four Views on, because Paul has 4 views on most of the things he's talking about. In one passage, we're going to get 4 views. In chapter 5, we saw the different views on original sin from the same author.
Yeah.
It's like, what the
hell? Choose your own adventure. Yeah. Choose your own adventure epistle. Yeah,
Choose
it's
your own
like you can.
adventure, soteriology. Yeah.
Exactly.
It just like a seed has all of what it takes to create the tree. He has
Yeah.
within these texts all that it takes for the
Right.
multi-denominational kind of landscape that we see now. It's all there
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
seed of this
Yeah.
text.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. With that being said, we are we're primed for Romans chapter 7. And
Let's
I'm
do
gonna
it.
let's do this at the risk of no. Let's make sure we don't sidetrack, but I want to ask a question. I'm going to give you my thoughts on this chapter, and I'm going to sum it up in one sentence. If you can, think for yourselves, guys, and give me what were your thoughts as you read this. Jay Witt, you hit me up yesterday morning, asked me if I had read the chapter yet. I thought it was Friday, so I didn't even read the chapter yet. I didn't read the chapter until this morning. But I read it this morning, and as I'm sitting there reading it, I literally said to myself, this is probably the most destructive and dangerous chapter in the New Testament.
Mental health for sure.
Exactly. I literally felt like this is responsible for. I thought Romans 5 was bad. I think this is probably the most dangerous chapter in the New Testament. But what were you guys? Just one sentence synopsis of this chapter. I know that's tough to say on the spot, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah. I would say that, well, well, okay. Obviously, the first portion of chapter 7, I didn't like at all, because of the potential misogynistic implications he's doing there. But how he ties that into the law of sin and death, it's almost like when you want to prove your thesis is right about something, you're reaching for the feeling I got was like you're just reaching for an analogy that's so just like it's a lack of words that.
Well, and keep in mind too
that
in his day and age, the analogy would have been like nobody would have had the problems that you're having.
Nobody had the problem. Yeah, correct. But just imagine just bringing in an analogy that is like you know how when you hear people argue their point, right, their argument, and then they bring up an analogy of like, well, like just like a really gross analogy, right? When if it could be something about how someone died, or it could be about mistreating your wife, or rape, or so like the feeling I got was like this is not the way. Like it's persuasive probably to one type of audience, really, but I think for broader persuasion or appeal, I think there are much better ways to potentially argue your case. But yeah, what your comment, Brady, that's I'm really trying to think through like, what you mean by that.
Okay.
And, maybe
Jay Witt nailed
that.
it. He obviously knew exactly what I meant there. But your thoughts, Jay Witt, on the chapter?
No, I do believe that this also has the seed in it for all of the self-flagellation of the Middle Ages of the monks, but also maybe in current day where it might not be widely practiced, but there's a certain kind of psychological self-flagellation where you're just, which self-flagellation, let's be clear, is just self-torture. This is a certain kind of masochistic torture of oneself, which might be a bit repetitive there, but you're mentally self-flagellating when you and he's doing it. He's saying, "Look at me, look." He's using the first person. So he's showing you how. He's like, "All right, all gather around, kids. This is how you do self-flagellation. This is how it's done. Come to Romans 7 to see how to beat yourself for just regular impulses like desiring something like a neighbor, which is whatever."
Yeah.
We'll get into it, I guess.
So one of the things we'll talk about as we get into this too is how did you view this chapter as a Christian? Because as a Christian, I found certain comforts in this chapter that now it's repulsive to me. So we're definitely going to get into that. All right. Okay, then let's do it. Romans chapter 7. I'm going to read a little bit, and you guys stop me when you want to stop
when
me.
when you feel the spirit.
Yeah, when
stop
you feel the
the non-spirit.
Yeah. Okay, let me share. I almost forgot to share my screen.
When you get the unction, tell them to stop.
All right. So I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version in case anybody wants to get on the same page literally or digitally. Do you not know, brothers? Do you not know, brethren? For I'm speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only during his life. Thus, a married woman is bound by law to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is discharged from the law concerning her husband. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. This is just an analogy for him.
It's just an analogy, but he just started talking about slavery just recently.
Okay.
Right. So it's like what's
wow.
Like, what do you really like about
okay.
marriage, slavery and marriage? Like you're putting those arguments this close together. Yeah, that was my reaction to this. It was just, it's ridiculous.
There's a great point.
Women catching strays.
Well, there's a great point that was made. If anybody saw, there was a recent discussion between Joshua Bowen, Dr. Joshua Bowen, Kip Davis on one side, and on the other side was Trent Horn, and I forget the other guy's name, but they were talking about biblical slavery. And the Christian apologists were trying to make the case that Old Testament slavery was a significant improvement on the slavery in the ancient Near Eastern world. And so they started talking about the way that women and children and slaves were treated. And then Joshua Bowen came back and said, yeah, but see, you're getting this messed up. These verses are not bringing the slave up to the level of wife and children. No, It's bringing wife and children down to the level of slave. And so the point that Al is making here about connecting this slave analogy or connecting this marriage analogy to this slave language is more proof that no, this isn't an honoring of that person, this is a devaluing of that person. And so I completely missed that when I read it, but that's interesting that stood out to you, Al.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's
being in the spirit of Paul, trying to connect these premises together. We're doing him a disservice here, a service. Sorry, we're doing him a service to do it. So yeah, Jay Witt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying he's not he's definitely not trying to make us think that both the man and the woman, he's not getting us to think about them. He's not speaking in an egalitarian language, is what I'm trying to get at. He could have chosen to do that, right? So like, just consider, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, he can't play. Like, it's not that hard to say a man and a woman are bound to each other for as long as they're married.
Right.
So just think about that. It would actually probably be quite easy to make the same point, but make it more egalitarian so that both the man and the woman are mentioned. But the fact that he speaks now, far be it from me to make the argument that he didn't believe a man was bound and that a man couldn't be an adulterer. But it's interesting that he goes to the woman and he's consistent through his argument using the woman as an adulterer, etc.
Well, this was my point to Al. My point to Al was, in his time, it was probably just more culturally acceptable.
Jay Witt, you got some sound coming through, FYI.
Oh, I didn't even hear it.
Or is that you, Brady?
I don't hear anything coming through other than us.
I don't hear anything.
Okay, never mind, guys.
Okay.
Maybe God's trying to tell you something.
Okay, all right.
But to Jay Witt's
Yeah,
point,
was it Samuel? He's like, whose voice is that? Eli? He's like, no, go talk to God, you know?
Here I am, Lord. Here I am, Lord.
This is ridiculous.
That commenter was right.
Sorry.
God is getting with you.
Okay, I have Elzai playing in my background for some reason.
You have Elzai?
So
Yeah.
So
you
never
got
mind,
L in
forget
there. L is in there. L. The Lord, he's in there.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That's so
Speaking
crazy.
of Elzai, I just listened
Speaking
to
of
the new
Elzai.
I just listened to the new Slum Village album, and I got about 7 tracks in before I realized, yo, Elzai is not on this album. So it's
Wow.
T3,
Wow.
T3 and
That's-
somebody else who's now Slum
Wow.
Village. I don't know
Yeah.
what happened to Elzai. Anyway,
Okay.
Yeah.
That's hilarious, guys.
You remember the
I
point
can't
you were
believe it.
making?
Yes. Paul's making this point about who's bound while the person is still alive, and the woman being the adulterer, because in his day and age, they're just probably more accustomed to looking at the woman as the adulterer than the man.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and so that's just, and it's interesting that we spent so much time talking about that, because this is just an analogy. He's making a point. He's making a point, but actually, the funny thing is, when he makes his point is going to be just as asymmetrical as the silly syllogism that we saw in chapter 6, and as the point that you are making now about why didn't you bring up the man? When he gets to the actual point of his analogy, you're like, wait a minute, that don't make sense. So let's go to the other side of this analogy here, where he tries to drill down on what he wants you to walk away with. Oh, where's my scripture? Sorry. Where is it at?
For the record, it is on the screen. It's still on the screen for us, right?
Yeah, it's
Right,
still
for you,
we
Albert?
see it. Yeah, I see it. I see it.
Yeah, you guys see it, but I don't.
Oh, really? Huh.
You want Albert to read it? Albert can read it, or I can read it. You want it until you figure it out, Brady?
Yeah.
I'll read it. I'll read it. Likewise, my brethren, you have died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to one another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. While we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions, aroused by the law, were at work in.
Hold on. Do you see an asymmetricalness here in this analogy so far? I can't be the only person.
Speak more.
I can't be the only person to quote this. So he says, look, he's trying to show how in this new schema he's setting up, you're not married to this law anymore, right? He says, just like a woman, right? As long as a husband is alive, she's bound to him. But when he dies, now she's free. If he's still alive and she lives with somebody else, she's an adulterer. Likewise, so hold on. Likewise, you have died to the law. If this was going to be symmetrical, it should be the law dying so that you're now free to be with Christ. You're now free to be with righteousness. But it's somehow in his twisted thinking, you dying frees you from the law. But in your analogy, let's
slow that down. Let's slow that down, Brady.
Right.
Let's slow it down, because I'm even trekking with you, and I'm like want to make sure that the audience is understanding what you're saying. Because some people might say, "What's the point?" He's just showing that when one spouse dies, the other one's free. What Brady's point is that the dying spouse in his analogy here is you,
right?
Not the law,
right?
Yeah, right.
So that the law is then free, but. Yeah, that doesn't really, like if you're trying to make an analogy, man, that's not the best way to do it. To like have it right away, straight away, have that kind of discontinuity.
Yes,
you immediately think, oh, wait a second, yeah, okay, so we have the law here, we have you, we have the husband, we have the wife. The husband dies, the wife is free. The you dies, the law is free. You see,
right.
do you guys get what he's saying?
Yeah.
Or no, if you die,
okay,
Christ is free.
Well,
if
here,
you
No,
die.
here he's saying the law.
No, here he's saying the
Here,
law.
here,
But
you
the law,
died through the body of Christ. So you already got Christ dying. Go back to chapter 5. Christ dying
Mhm.
and you dying with Christ means the law is now free to do something with whoever
the
it
law
wants.
is free. Okay.
That would be a symmetrical analogy. What
Mhm.
he's doing here, now his point could still stand. He
No,
could
no,
still
hold
be,
on, hold on, hold on.
go ahead.
He muddies this even more because
Okay.
just in the previous
Mhm.
verses, the law is contingent upon both the wife and the husband. So you know what I mean? So to me it's even more confusing because he just used that analogy. So
Mm.
based on that analogy, you have died to the law through the body of Christ.
Well, remember I said
Then
this a second ago that Jay Witt brought up the point that he doesn't mention the wife, the husband being free if the wife dies. So he's leaving one side of this analogy unaddressed. I think almost intentionally, he's only dealing with the one side. But then when he goes to apply it to his readers, they're the ones dying because they died with Christ. Go ahead.
I think I have an apologetic resolution here that you might hear from a Christian.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
And it'd be interesting to hear what you guys say. So if we took verse 4 and we put our thinking caps on, I'm always telling the audience, put on your thinking caps, right? And we think of the body of Christ having died on the cross, being the death that's going on here.
Mhm.
Him saying you have died to the law might not literally be him saying you have died. It might be him saying that you're no longer bound to the law, which has been killed basically or died in the body of Christ.
Yeah, but he never makes the point that the law dies.
Don't take this as my position.
Mhm.
I'm just saying
that's my response
I
to
could
the
see-
apologist. My response to the apologist is he never mentions the law dying. As a matter of fact, he's going to make a case that the law is very much still intact. You're dying
so now
because you died with Christ.
We need to introduce the word antinomian here so that our audience, if you're not familiar with the word antinomian, some people accused Paul of being an antinomian because of passages just like this, where he says, you have died to the law. Antinomian, basically, you can do the etymology on it, just basically anti-law, right? So, go ahead, Brady.
Well, I was just speeding you on to say meaning, and let you finish. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you finish it.
Right. Meaning the law, the Old Testament law of Moses is not applicable to Christians anymore. If you're antinomian, that's what that means. You don't believe that the law has any application for the Christian, any obligation, I should say, for the Christian has any obligation to the law.
Now understand that if while Paul was, according to the text, was alive, there was confusion about his relation to the text and antinomian, and he has to come back and say, no, I'm not saying X, Y. Imagine how much more confusing it would be when he's not around to clear up all the controversies that he stirs up by the way he writes and loosey-goosey usage of analogies like this. Go ahead.
I was thinking, as I was reading this, I was thinking that it's possible, because the gospel authors wrote after Paul. I was thinking that it's probably likely, very possible, that the reason why the gospel authors have Jesus saying things about, think not that I came to destroy the law.
Like Matthew 5 too?
Right.
Like in Matthew 5, yeah.
It may have been people trying to save the Christian message from antinomianism. And so you make Jesus a strong proponent of the law, as opposed to what Paul's doing here, which makes it seem like you could build a case for antinomianism.
Yeah, he seems like he's nullifying the law. But anyway, he mentions the law. I think so.
He's gonna bring it back.
So we as those who love our podcast, they love the fact that we're constantly putting our Christian thinking cap on and showing in a unique way. I don't listen to a lot of counter apologists or whatever, but I think we in a pretty unique way, because we were so thoroughly immersed in defending the faith, at least I was. That's actually my study of apologetics is what led me out of Christianity. I'm very much so the last door to leave before I left Christianity was the door of apologetics.
Mm.
And so even as a unbeliever, I look at Christianity from the other side of that door through the threshold of apologetics. So that's what we're doing here with this pod is we see this passage, we read it. It's easy to laugh. I mean, was it Billy Carson? Some people say, hey, you're laughing. These are cheap laughs. Well, we're trying to do the opposite with the text. We're not giving you cheap laughs. We're actually putting our thinking caps on and trying to subject our current thought to the most rigorous Christian apologetics. And if it can stand the test, then it has stood the test, right? That's Steele Manning it.
Yeah, and I could hear some Christians saying, these are not the most rigorous thoughts. Just let us cook. On one hand,
I beg to differ.
On one hand, we used to be the ones making these strong arguments. So we're sort of just pulling them from the mental Rolodex of here's how I used to defend this, or here's how I would get around this if I was still in. Though granted, we're not going to give undue time to that kind of thought because we are on the other side of it now. So everything Jay Witt just said, amen, with the caveat of, but we're not here to defend it anymore either. So keep that in mind for the person that's like, no, defend it more, still man it more. Okay, so I had an issue with the lack of symmetry in his analogy here about who's dying and then who's free. All right. So that's verse 4. Verse 5, while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members. At work, did that minister to you, Jay? What happened there? I mean,
no, that was me.
No, that was
Did it get good to you?
The Viagra of the law.
The law is to be visualized is the hottest woman you've ever seen or the hottest man you've ever seen.
Oh, your sinful flesh.
Don't get your law Viagra. Get your law Viagra.
It got me hard. So that's what the law did for me.
So while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions were aroused by the law. I'm never going to see this verse again the same way. Thanks to what Al just said.
The law of Viagra.
Aroused by the law, we're at work in our members to bear.
In our members. Yo, come on, man. No, did he? It was in our members? We're really going there? Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Come on, man. Wow. Well, this is the word of God, man. Chill.
Yes.
Yeah, this is how believers talk about the word, right? I mean, the guy who was just telling us we can't stop talking about it. This is how we do it.
While we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions were aroused by the law, aroused by the law, were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. But now we are discharged from the law, dead to that which held us captive, so that we might serve not under the old written code, but under the new life of the Spirit. But in the new life of the Spirit. So new life as opposed to your old life. The law used to arouse your sinful members to sin, and that would lead to death. But now you're going to live in the Spirit. Can we dive into now the law of sin and death? Can we dive into chapter 7 and get into it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I should have not known sin. I should not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, finding opportunity in the commandments, wrought in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. Thoughts?
Yeah, so this gets into the whole question that Paul, or the idea that Paul had talked about in the earlier chapters, where the law was given to the Jews not to the Greeks, but and therefore, you know, the Greeks somehow did not know, I guess, by implication, that one shouldn't covet or one shouldn't steal or bear false testimony
Well,
or,
yes and no.
you know,
Yes and no, because remember chapter 2, it's written
yeah,
on their hearts.
it's written on their hearts. But I mean, come on, Paul. I mean, what are you saying here? You're trying to have your cake and eat it too,
Exactly.
right? This is the whole.
Break it down, please.
Yeah, I mean, like there's okay, let's try to steel man this, right, in some way, but maybe he's saying that there's a way to follow the law that is purely concrete, like, you know, the law was given to you in a concrete form, literally on a stone tablet.
Mm-hmm.
It was, so basically it's information from God that is coming to you, that is new to you because it's already written in your hearts. So I don't get that. And then so now you are bound to it in some sort of concrete legal manifestation, which you can argue is not really concrete anyway, because that's how, when you look at how laws are implemented, I mean, it's always argued from some level of abstraction and metaphysics, right? In order to, so without getting into the whole philosophy of like how things are instantiated in the world, we don't know. It's kind of a mystery, but the thing is, now okay, so then what, I don't get it, right? So then you try to drill down into the concept of how Greeks and Gentiles would have it written on their hearts, which to me is also some sort of metaphysical manifestation in your mind. So I can't steel man it. That's the best that I can do.
Let me try to help here for anybody
yeah.
who's trying to figure out what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
Paul has already said several different things about the law and the heart that conflicts with what he's saying now, because he's saying without the law being given, sin doesn't even have a way to like awaken and arise within your members. But once the law is given, he even says in chapter 5, sin was at work. Sin and death was at work before the law was given, but because the law had not been given, there was really no way to hold people accountable. But you already said back in chapter 2, the law was written on their hearts. But now you're saying unless the law is actually given, sin doesn't even have a way to come alive. But once the law is given, once the law says you shall not covet, now you're aware of what covetousness is, and now you're going to covet. So you're making people susceptible to sin as a result of the law once it's given, but at the same time saying it was already given, written on people's hearts, which those ideas cannot work at the same time. Even if I try to stillman it like Al just did, are you saying that, like, how is this law arousing sin in the members of people who don't have it, yet somehow still have it?
Yeah, I mean, that's this is so convoluted. But not the least, I mean, of concerns here is the concern for, well, if you're doing fine without the law, then what the hell's the point in giving you a law? Like, I mean, I think that's the biggest elephant in the room, is that he's saying, you know, you're doing good, and then the law actually just awakens, which is not true, because he goes on to name things that you don't need a law to awaken, like coveting something. I don't have to hear somebody say, do not covet, to covet. like that's something that's happening prior to me hearing that it's a law, right? So that's just not true. It's demonstrably not true. But if you take him at his word, what does he say here? In let me see what verse. Okay. The very commandment which promised life proved to be, and actually let's go back, because I guess that's getting a little ahead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. Which begs a certain question. You have to ask yourself, well, if the guy is alive, and here he's making alive synonymous with like non-law breaking, it seems.
Right.
Why would you then give a law which would kill a person in that sense and awaken sinful passions.
And not just, the law doesn't just come in and revive the flesh and kill a person. It actually increases sin.
Yeah, increases the trespass, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like now that I know it's wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Entrapment.
And I know his argument. I know his argument because his argument is going to basically say, well, he has to increase or multiply the sinfulness so that the grace, by contrast, is multiplied, or at least you can see how abundant the grace is because you've been made. So, in other words, look, I need to have you so destitute that you're not even in the homeless shelter. You need to be like on the street so that when I lift you from, was it the old Trading Places movie or something? It's tantamount to Trading Places there in the bathroom, and Eddie Murphy at some point realizes, oh, it was all a bet. It was basically like the Book of Job, essentially. This was all like some bet they made, a handshake deal. Essentially, I need you to be Eddie Murphy at Trading Places so that when I lift you out of there into my palace of riches, the goodness of my act of lifting you out of the poverty is magnified. But you have to ask now, okay, if that's your argument, which it apparently is Paul's argument, just stop, put your thinking cap on, sit back in your recliner or whatever, wherever you're sitting, maybe laying on your bed with your phone in your hand, and just think. Are you saying that there's no other way you could magnify yourself other than to debase the other individual? Because essentially that's what's happening here. It's saying, I got to make you lower. It's like, last week I used or I guess it was extra strategy. I used the Elijah-esque pouring of water on the altar. Well, here it's again, he's like, I need you to be lower so that when I lift you up, you can, like, it'll magnify my generosity. But then you have to ask yourself, the magnification of your generosity is only is proportionate to how much lower you made me. So you basically ended up at the same place, right? Because you just lowered me so that you can lift me up more. So your generosity is no greater if you were, you get what I mean?
Yeah,
I should shut up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got it.
Good stuff. I'm sorry, real quick. Did my screen stop sharing for a minute there?
No, it's still going.
Okay,
it's still going.
Okay. When we start talking, I try to take the image down so that they could see us, because but it didn't happen like I thought. Let me give a shout out to Thurgood. Just gave a $99.99 super chat.
Oh my gosh, this guy is killing it.
Thank you so much, man. We definitely appreciate you. Definitely appreciate you. I don't know what to say other than we do this out of love. We do this out of not wanting anybody else to be in that place of thinking you're the only one questioning the book that you gave your life to, this faith that you loved and may have been willing to die for and you lived for and structured your life around it. Now you're questioning it and you feel like you're alone. We get up on Sunday mornings. We get together on Tuesdays. We put this time in. We don't have to do this. This is not a grift for us. We're not looking to get rich off of this. We do this because we would hate to see anybody else not be able to look out and hear somebody else say, you're not crazy. You are right to question this. You are right to think this doesn't add up. And lightning is not going to strike you down if you give yourself to these doubts. So we thank you for your appreciation. We appreciate it. And yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I stopped at verse 7 on verse 8. And
I went ahead and read what, 9 and 10.
Well, let me just read 9 to 12 real quick. So we can, okay. I was, and this is the part that Jay talked about. He said, I was doing good before the law. Why'd you give it then? I was once alive apart from the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. The very commandment which promised life proved, and this is very interesting what's happening here. From a sociological standpoint, here's what's happening. If Paul is a real person and not just a literary figure, because there are such things as literary historical figures. You can create a literary figure and make this figure, Paul, the author of all these epistles, and before you know it, a couple generations go by, maybe even a decade or two goes by, and he was a real person to people who just received the letters, but never knew that there was a Paul or that there was no Paul. So we don't know that Paul was a historical figure. But if he is more than just a literary character, if he's a real person, what you're looking at is a human being in a socio-economic, geopolitical situation, trying to figure out what is wrong. Something is clearly wrong. Our God, we as the Jews, we're people, we say that our God is the Shiznit, and no other God can defeat our God. But we were in bondage to Babylon under Persian rule, then the Greeks, now Rome. We got this prophet named Daniel, who, if you go back in time, his prophecies are a little wonky. Maybe he wrote them after the fact, but we like to believe he wrote them before. But if Daniel did write prophecies, our God is supposed to smash the clay and the bronze and all these different Daniel's vision. Our God's supposed to smash these nations. We're going to rule. Why is this not? Nobody thought Rome wasn't part of this equation.
Wait, can I tag team you right there? Can I tag team you right there? The present day version of this is like the Hebrew Israelites who they claim to have lineage with the Israelites of the Bible, and it's like, why do we look around and see Black people in the state that they're in, in these former colonies of England and so forth? This is because we're sinful. We've forgotten who we are. You create an ideology, right? Same idea. You create this ideology. You say, actually, we are the 12 tribes, and what? If it does nothing, if it does nothing, it does this for you. It provides you with a point for pride. It gives you a point of reference to have some sense of dignity, even though you look around, even if none of that is real in real life, even if you're wearing like a tinfoil hat and a foil outfit out in 90-degree heat, talking in front of City Hall, and you're literally a cartoon character, you have a sense of dignity. And what this says is, like you say, sociologically, there's a lot going on. For some people, since they're willing to sacrifice reality for a sense of dignity.
And not just dignity, Jay Witt, but it also gives you something to look forward to. Think about the Billy Carson episode we just did on exit strategy. Remember, he said, if we just get to a certain percentage of the people who receive the Christ consciousness, then we'll be back. We'll be back. And you're like, wait, first of all, what's the certain percentage? And then back to what? It's so vague, but it gives you, like you said, first a dignity. Oh, here's who we really are. But then also, if it's something to shoot for, something to look for, something to look forward to, something to shoot for. If we just can get back to this, then how's that tie in here? Because what is
and Paul showed his hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? Yeah. Earlier, remember we were analyzing that passage where he talks about hope does not disappoint us and so forth. He shows his hand. He's showing you, this is what I'm trying to get you to. I'm trying to get you there.
Yeah. And so how's that tie in? Well, he says it right here. He says, I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. The very commandment which promised life, this is how it ties into what we just talked about. Because we're the people of God, our God's supposed to have us ruling, and we're not ruling. He gave us this law and said, the way the story goes in our community, if you're an Israelite, we got kicked out of the land because we weren't keeping the Torah. If we just go back to keeping Torah and worshiping Yahweh only, then we'll get back in our land and we'll be ruling again. And so then wait a minute, we're back. We got Pharisees, we got Sadducees keeping us on point. Why are we not ruling? Is there something wrong with the law? Here's where Paul says, no, I got it. The very law that promised life, it's nothing wrong with the law or the lawgiver. It's just that this thing that we thought was going to give us righteousness and make us good enough for God to put us back on top, it was supposed to give us life, but it actually ended up giving us death, not because there's something wrong with the law, but because there's something wrong with us. This is the very
Mm-hmm.
definition of blame the victim.
Mm-hmm.
God's perfect. The law is perfect. It promised life. The only reason why it didn't give us what we thought it was going to give us is because it's something wrong with us. And go ahead. I got something I want to share.
The reason why Moses had to destroy the tablets that God wrote with his own finger is because y'all were down there worshiping the golden calf.
Right. Exactly.
The blame.
Yeah. It's
the blame is always on us, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So one last thing I want to make, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I think, I was listening to that Jordan Peterson interview with Alex O'Connor, but when they deal with the history problem, right? You see Jordan Peterson almost like vacillating on that question, and how that ties into here, in my view, is that he makes the charge that you can't view the Bible in the scientific sense that we do today, or maybe the historical sense that we know it today. But it's almost like history is just meant to explain where we are, right? Like how we got to where we are. So when Paul is doing this, right, he's applying his rational faculties to figure out, like, I've already given you this ideological explanation for thing, or the ideological description, right? But then he's trying, as you and Jay would say, like, he's trying to make sense of, like, why are we still under Roman oppression? Why are we still under this whole fact that, like, where we are today does not seem to reflect the ideology. So clearly, Paul is trying to make sense of what is the literal world, like what is, like, what he's seeing before his very eyes. His reality. So I think this is like a good demonstration of, like, what Paul is trying to achieve, what he fails to do, and how it's really not too different than how we view history today, or what we think history should do to, in terms of, in the service of understanding the world. So
to Al's point, let me just share something. In my book, Let There Be Gaslight, I talk about this here. Paul is not the only person doing this. Okay. Other Jewish figures of his time in the 1st and 2nd century were looking around at their geopolitical position and trying to figure out what's wrong. And instead of blaming God, the prophets, the law, they blamed the human condition. And so for Ezra and to Baruch, these are apocryphal works. They do something very similar to what Paul does in Romans 5. So this is taken from, I have this in my book, Let There Be Gaslight, but I'm quoting for Ezra and to Baruch here. Listen to what they say. O Adam, what have you done? For though it was you who sinned, the misfortune was not yours alone, but ours also, who are your descendants. That's for Ezra. And then to Baruch says, oh, what have you done, Adam, to all those who were born after you? Now, you got to keep in mind, before the 1st century AD, no Jewish figure was going back looking at Adam as the reason that sin is in the world. You don't see that. First of all, the whole idea about the sin and the garden and all that were probably late additions to the Torah in the first place. They were not part of it. That was added after the fact to kind of just give the story a beginning. But nowhere in the Old Testament do you see this idea that Adam is the cause of sin coming into the world, right? But around the 1st century, when people are trying to figure out, wait, we thought Greece would be the last one to rule us. The Jews were saying this. And now we got Rome here. And we don't seem to be we have a revolt against Rome, but then they shut that down. So now to Baruch says, oh, Adam, what have you done to all those who were born after you? And what will be said to the first Eve who obeyed the snake? For all this multitude are going to corruption, nor is there any numbering those whom the fire devours. So these are people trying to say, okay, you know what? They had this thing called Yetzer, Y-E-S-E-R. The Hebrew roots are Y, S, and R. Yetzer. It's the evil inclination. That's what they were trying to say. I don't know why we sin, but there seems to be this evil inclination that we're just going to sin. And how to explain it, we don't know. So we'll just go back and we'll just put it on Adam. And some of them were saying maybe God just made us this way. None of them were attaching it to the tree. They just were trying to figure out why are we like this? All this is to say, when Paul says the law was promised to bring life, but it brought death, he's juxtaposing these ideas of God wasn't wrong, the law isn't wrong. I guess the only way we could make sense of this is we've got to be wrong. And because of his unwillingness to blame God and the law, what he's about to do in the next couple of verses is he's going to shit all over the human condition to make it our fault. And this is what I mean when I say this is probably the most damaging, dangerous part of the New Testament, because what he's about to do to the human condition is going to wreak so much havoc on mental health for anybody who's encountered these ideas. Thoughts about any of that real quick? And Jay, what are you here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're there.
You were uncharacteristically silent.
So
no, I want to leave space.
One of the things that
hey, hold on real quick. I'm gonna dip. I got to grab my laptop cord. But
okay, just keep talking.
Yeah, yep. I'll be right back.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things that I've in my deconstruction process, and I'm still deconstructing, right? For I don't know if the audience is I think doing this pod has really helped me in my deconstruction as well. I've learned a lot of things through Brady and Jay Witt, but one of the things that I have learned, or I'm learning, especially if you study, actually, if you just follow Dan McClellan or you follow, other biblical scholars, and they start to really unravel like the origins of the text, especially when it comes to a way of understanding Genesis and the Adam story. So, what's been interesting to me, right? Because Paul interprets Adam in this light. He's going back and he's trying to give us a reason for why things are still wrong. But apparently through the biblical scholarship, you kind of understand and see that like God was almost like this kind of entity that was like almost like an adversary in a way, and maybe at that time in like even hundreds or thousands of years before Paul, like that was an ideological way to explain why there were catastrophes, right? Or why you can die from famine one year, or you could potentially deal with other misfortunes, right? And that to me, like that's typically how I think a lot of religions kind of view deities, right? It's almost like that's why they give sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
so there's not that much of a difference. And then, but I think especially in the Adam story, I think is interesting because the knowledge, the tree of knowledge, right? The eating the fruit and then getting the knowledge of good and evil or something like that. Like maybe they can see that as sort of an analogy to the law, but in that Genesis narrative, like that's not really the case. Like you don't really see. It's almost like God didn't want them to be godlike at all.
No,
and
it's
then,
not almost. That exactly is the.
That is exactly
how those in all the cognate cultures. That's how those stories go.
Exactly.
But we also have to.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
No, it's just I don't think people often analyze the nature of a story, whatever you think is meant by the fruit of knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
You have to consider, like, how magical and fairy tale-ish that is.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, say, for instance, I go to the supermarket and I pick up a banana. What are you telling me? That this physical fruit was invested with, like, that by virtue of it going through your digestive system, which is what it would have had to do. You have to eat it. It goes down your esophagus, into your stomach, into your smaller intestine, your larger intestine, and then you defecate. And the nutrients from it go into your body, and they provide all kinds of things that you need for chemicals in your body to have certain reactions. The idea that along with doing that, because it is described as a fruit, it would also have some sort of please don't crucify me, David, for saying metaphysical, because I think it's appropriate here, right? That this fruit would have metaphysical properties, and let's go, just in case I get crucified for using that there, some sort of preternatural or spiritual property that like partake. Just consider that's literally magic. You're saying there was a magic fruit.
Right.
Now, I don't think people.
You know what's wild, Jay Witt? As much as I've written about this, I don't think I've ever had the kind of epiphany I just got while you were saying that. Like, matter of fact,
go ahead, talk. Speak on it.
I don't even think I touch on that part of it in my book. Just the magical nature of a fruit that has the property to dispense knowledge of right and wrong. Like, as a 47-year-old man, I don't think I've ever sat and thought about how fairy tale-ish that is until just now. Like that, this is a weird moment for me right now. Like the fruit of the knowledge.
It's like he ate.
Yeah.
It's like, what does fruit, like, we don't have any analogy for that now. There's nothing you can eat that will, I wish that were the case. I mean, some people might say you need to take, what's the pill that you take that'll make it easy for you to remember things when you're testing and stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Al, please tell me. If you're, but
give me more. Give me more. What
people Adderall. Here you go. Adderall.
Oh yeah.
All right. So right. You have things like Adderall that you can take that will aid your memory, that may aid your existing mind, but we don't know of anything you can take that can just download information. It's like the fruit was essentially a floppy disk. You ate it, and it just provided information that you didn't have previously.
Now, hold on.
Just think about that.
That's worth spending some time just thinking about the fact that you would believe something like that. But to tie it back into what's happening in Romans 7 here, there is something that Paul is saying about the law, that it also has this magical property that once you hear the law, it now somehow awakens within you.
Perfect.
This idea of, well, now you're going to really sin because now you know the law. Like,
right.
What is it about?
And that's why I'm giving it to you. Let's go there. And that's why I'm giving it to you. Like,
what is it about knowing the law that's going to now make you a more advantageous or more pernicious sinner? Like,
yes. Like I know I hate sin. I don't like sin. But I'm going to give you law that I know is going to awaken sinful desires and make you a greater sinner as a result. And I guess, like I said, if you just go one step further, that's so that I can lift you from the depths of your sin and actually magnify myself. So it makes this whole thing, the whole soteriological enterprise is an act of self-aggrandizement. Like you're taking salvation and turning it into it's almost like a self-esteem project for the deity, right? Like I don't know how else to put it, because it's like you got to be made a greater sinner so that my glory will be seen by who? Yeah, like you want your glory. Like even parents aren't trying to impress. Like it's very easy to impress little children, right? So if the chasm between us in terms of our ontology and the deity is greater, infinitely greater than the chasm between a 3-year-old and a parent, why the hell would he care about you being impressed by his exploits and his salvific exploits? Yeah, you're a 3-year-old, and granted, if you read the writings of Jonathan Edwards, who refers to I sit above the circle of the earth, and all you are like grasshoppers. So if he takes from that and extrapolates that there's an infinite chasm between us in terms of our ontology. But if the chasm is that great, how are you like, how are you driven in a motivation to get glory from something that's greater than a parent getting glory from
Can
a
you
3-year-old? It's,
imagine?
of course.
You've used this analogy before, Jay. Can you imagine carrying 1 ounce about what the ants in your front yard think about you?
Exactly.
Like, how much
Yes.
glory could you get from an ant saying, yo, you see his car? Yo, you see those shoes she wearing? Like, do you think about an ant? Do you get any glory, any amount of esteem from ants talking about how great you are?
It's like somebody who can't dress saying, yo, that outfit is hot. Like, he got that shit on. It's like, it's not a compliment, right? It's not a compliment when it's coming from somebody who, so if God's intellect and his ontology is that much greater than ours, there is no amount of rejoicing and praise we could give to him that would actually amount to much of anything in his eyes, because why? He's infinitely greater than us. And anybody's seen this. Like, if you're easy to impress, and granted, if you have omnipotence, everybody's easy to impress. Why? Because you can do everything, right? Like, so if you're easy to impress, that is, we're creatures here on this planet. Like, yeah, your dog is impressed by the simplest thing, right? Albert, your dog will be impressed by things that even a 3-year-old might not be impressed. But just take it and apply it to human beings. The same species. You take a 5-year-old and you take his dad and let him do something. Wow, dad, every little kid thinks his dad is Superman. Why? Because he's a little kid. So in other words, all of this argument is to say God didn't have to make us more evil and wicked to get more glory out of us. He could have gotten glory out of us without lowering us by giving us the law that made us greater sinners. That's my point.
Well,
anyway.
And part of the reason why he gave the law was to make us greater sinners, but so that the law could do its full work of showing how sinful sin actually is. And once we saw how sinful sin actually is, then we would see our great need for salvation. So we got about 4 verses left. Let's dive in to the rest of
one last question. Okay. One last question. So, and maybe our philosopher followers might want to get into the comments and comment on this. Just consider what is sin an abstract idea? Is it something that, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things. Like, if you have to show me how sinful sin is, what are you implying? Are you implying that sin is something that is like this sort of abstract idea that exists prior to someone doing it?
Well,
and if so, why?
Paul says sin entered into the world. So, like,
so that
is it abstract enough that it existed outside of the world and then entered, or did it not exist before they ate from the tree? Because, like I said, that word yeser, yeser, it's an evil inclination. An evil inclination entered into the world. Where is this impulse coming from? Now, granted, this is philosophy light for our commoners. I'm just posing the question: when you're saying he had to show sin up for being how sinful it is, are we implying that there's some sort of what are we talking about? We used to call it in the theological circles that I was in. We called sin a principle. It was sin and death was a principle at work within our members. Well, matter of fact, let's just read these verses, because these verses are going to get into it. So verse 13, speaking of the law, he says, did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin. That's Jay Witt's question. What is it then? What is sin? It was sin working death in me through what is good. Sin was using the law in order that sin might be shown to be sin. So this thing, like I said, this principle, this inclination, is it a disease? That's another word that they talked about it as a disease, a condition. This sin was working death in me through the law, through that which is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. So now that there's a commandment, sin was like, oh shit, I can't wait to use that. I'm going to use the commandment to make you, I'm going to become sinful beyond measure. Give me a law, watch me break it. This evil inclination that we just, it's either a disease, a condition, an inclination, whatever it is, this sin thing, it's in us now. And it's going to use the law, and it's going to become sinful beyond measure, not because the law is bad, but because this sin thing that's in us is just that bad.
So is there this duality eternally for the Christian, where you have, they said, the scripture says, in God is no darkness at all, right? So he's supposed to be good. So are we implying, this is just a question, again, it's a philosophical question, and I'm not claiming I have the answer to it, but is the implication here that there's this duality where you have an omnibenevolent deity, but simultaneously he exists with the reality of basically omni-malevolence, I guess that would be the opposite that's out there, sort of abstractly, and maybe divorced from a being, or perhaps present in a being. So I don't know, it's just a thought.
Present in a being for sure. Existing apart from a being. I once heard a theologian say, the second there were two wills in existence, that was the moment sin was born. As long as there was only one will, i.e. God's will, no sin. The second two wills were in existence, then sin was born. So even
great statement though. How does the second will, how is it born? Is it born by abiogenesis? Like how?
Yeah, good question.
Where does it come from?
Yeah. Well, if will is a component of personhood, you had the potential for sin as long as you had other persons. It's when those other persons use their will in a way that God's will is not willing to have be. So I guess you could be a person with a will, you just can't have your own will. The second you have your own will, then I guess sin is born in that scheme.
Okay, look, let's press it a little further. So you're saying, I'm gonna spit this out real quick, Al.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm just gonna throw the word latent out in there. Because like in the creation of that creature is the latent possibility for, so you've worked into it, like, this, go ahead, Albert, I'm sorry.
So I think the problem with that explanation, Brady, is you have the existence of two wills, and wills in itself, is the definition of will essentially a property of, like, where does the good and evil fit into that definition? Well, and I think that's the philosophical problem.
If I could rephrase the question I'll just ask, which is a great question. By nature of what a will is, like, it's almost like hard to say it a different way, because a will is a willingness to X. So the very fact that you have two different people, you inevitably are going to have two wills. So it's almost like just by making another person, you've introduced the possibility for, not possibility, almost the inevitability of sin. If I will vanilla ice cream and you will chocolate, is it sin to not want what you want?
Right.
And so now you
start asking, this is not to debate that point. I'm just thinking, like, I could see the possibility of the creation of a sentient being that has almost instinctively, programmed instinctively into it, so that it's more or less autonomic to that creature to behave in certain ways.
And would you still call that a free will?
Well, I mean, in as much as we value, like, are any of our wills free, really?
Well, yeah, I thought about that after I asked the question. Would you still call it a will? Would you still call it a separate will? That's a good question. Forget that I said free will.
Yeah,
would you still call it a separate will if it was pre-programmed to only do your will?
Well, okay. When I, now we're getting into the attributes of God, essentially. So when you're talking about my will, you have what you call like his decretive and his prescriptive. And what we're talking about here, so this is interesting, like his prescriptive will would be essentially the law, right? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I have a thought too. Go ahead, Brady.
So see if y'all can rock with me on this, and maybe we'll come back to it at some point. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that, let's say, a God is the answer for what's responsible for our reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for a God to create other beings with wills? I'm not even going to use the word free, right? With the potential to will. Let's just say that. Other beings with the potential to will opposite God's will, but even in that that ability that he's giving these beings, he only gives them the ability to will other good things. Like I said, there's no right or wrong, because Al, you mentioned the whole idea about good and evil, right? There's no good and evil when it comes to chocolate or vanilla. Is it possible for a God to have created a universe and people with wills, and then in giving them wills, only give them the ability to will a variety of all good things, so that they still have a will that is unique? I'm staying away from the word free, but they still have a will that is their own, but even in that own will, only good things they only have the ability to will other good things that may.
I can envision it.
Okay.
I can envision that. All right. Bear with me, audience. Kick back at me. Hold
on real quick. Part of that, me asking that question, is because if a God could have done that, a God need not to have made a universe where free will results in the chaos that we see now. A God could have made a world with people with wills, where all the various wills still only will good things. That was
that would still be chaos, though, Brady. So, but yeah, go ahead, Jay. That's mine.
Well, I mean,
when I say chaos, I'm talking about the destruction.
The destruction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That could still potentially be chaotic.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'll let Jay go ahead and speak.
We know that. Man, I'm sure. I almost forgot my bookmark on my point. But basically, no, that's fine. It's fine. You had to get that out for sure. Basically what I'm saying is, it's not incongruous with the creation of creatures to set in place parameters for them. Just like a duck or a bird might migrate instinctively. I mean, there are so many parameters. So basically, this was my point. My point is that there are so many parameters on us physiologically that determine what it is that we can do. I don't see why dispositionally it's impossible to have similar parameters that do no violence to a certain kind of freedom within the creature.
Human beings can't fly without apparatus. Fish can't,
exactly.
There are things that by our nature we can and can't do that doesn't necessarily impose upon our will as much as
our humanity,
our ability.
Yes. So in other words, this is just an elaborate argument for saying that there could have been a situation in existence where you don't have this what did I call it? This duality in place. This essentially what sounds like an eternal duality. It's almost like a yin and yang kind of thing or something. I don't want to misuse that terminology, but it almost seems that he's saying you have the good and necessarily you have the evil. And you have the light and you necessarily have the dark. Now, Paul isn't making elaborate arguments, but it seems that you can draw those implications out from certain statements he's making, because he just assumes that there's this latent evil. Now, the question is, where does the latent evil come from? If he's the literal creator of everything, then where does the evil come from? And it's not enough to say it's a mystery, okay? At least not for the Ichabod podcast. This is what, when we see mystery on the door, like do not enter, we're like, that's exactly the door we're going for. Right. We're going for that door, right? Right. Like if you are what is it in Colossians 1, he says, he is before all things, by him all things were created, things in heaven, things on earth. All things were made by him and for him. I'm quoting that from memory, so it may be a little off. But in Colossians 1, he claims that Christ is the creator of literally all things. Now, I don't know what that word means in Greek, but I'd assume in English that implies the entire cosmos and everything within it, the universe. Yeah. So that would, if evil is something other, we have the passage, was it in John, where he talks about God, there is no shadow of turning. There's no darkness in him, right? So if God is all good and light, and there's nothing evil in him, then are we talking about, via this duality, the coexistence of eternal evil? And I feel like I'm pinning the Christian against the wall with this one. Because if Christ, according to Colossians 1, now this is if you think there's a univocal voice or univocal, depending on how you want to pronounce it, voice in the text. If we take a passage where it says Christ creates everything is created by him and for him, and then you have evil. So maybe you might want to say he creates evil, and you might want to go to the Isaiah passage and say, yeah, he's the author of it, right? But if you're not comfortable with that, then what is your stance? Are you saying that evil coexists with God eternally, and how does it exist? In what form? Is it abstracted? Is it personified? Are we saying that Satan is eternal? I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to distract us too much. But go ahead. I know you want.
Yeah. So those are great questions, Jay. And I think it gets at the heart of it's unanswerable, I think, to people who think critically about it, because the answers we get, according to what Brady has said, doesn't really line up, just in terms, like conceptually and philosophically. Because if you're going to say it's bound up to will, or a multitude of wills, or it's bound up into a principle, those are not connected very well, like thought wise, right? Because we have wills are not.
I'm sorry.
Wills are not.
I'm sorry. Let me be clear. It just hit me. The stance that I was trying to voice is not that the second there were two wills in existence, sin existed. The second there was a contrary will to God's.
Well, I think a multitude of wills implies that it's contrary,
and that was my point exactly. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that still doesn't constitute a definition that I think Jay.
Hold up, Albert. So when you say a multitude of wills, by definition, just for the listening audience, hold on to the thought you were about to make. For the listening audience, it doesn't count as a multitude of wills if it's the same will. Like if I'm saying we're going to get strawberry ice cream for Albert and Brady and myself, right? If it's not a multitude of wills if all of us agree upon that, right? So necessarily when you say there are multiple,
no, it can be that. That was my question about if you could create beings that only will good things, couldn't you say they each still have their own will? Because if all three of us agree without one of us making the other two agree, we could all have our individual will, but none of them are contrary, and so there's no problem.
Right. Yeah, but there's so I think I agree with you. There's a sense in which there's a multiplicity of wills there, right? But at the same time, there is a sense in which it's a singular will. We all want strawberry ice cream. You see what I mean? So I think both are true, right? Go ahead, Albert. And you were making a point, and I derailed you. I don't want to derail. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah, so I think you guys we're getting closer here, because I think in a sense, Jay, what you're right. Like if we all chose the same thing, does that actually constitute as a single will or the same will? Or
I would say the same desire, but not the same will.
the same desire, but not the same will. Yeah, exactly. So I think we're divining things.
No, okay, because I know they're gonna kill us with the philosophy in the comments because I mean because desire is almost a synonym for will here. But go ahead. I mean, this is fun. This is, but I don't want us to get off track though. I guess we're already off.
Desire.
No, we're not. We're not actually.
No, we're not. I think we're getting to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Desire could be a synonym, but I think depending on how. I think the way it's defined, it's still distinct, right? So a desire, I think, is just a simple like what you want at a given particular time. But a will constitutes, I think, an entire, I don't know what you would call it, a corpus of desires built in that runs along the axis of time, right?
And that's why I simplified it. That's why I used the illustration of something very concrete. If we all want strawberry, okay, if I say I want strawberry ice cream for the group, let me word it that way. If I say I want for the group, we're getting ready to get together and eat ice cream, and I want strawberry ice cream for the group. And you say I want strawberry ice cream for the group, and Brady says I want strawberry ice cream for the group. I guess you could say that's a multiplicity of wills, but at the same time, it's the same will. Like, you get what I mean? No?
Yeah, I think you're using it different. You're using it different in the second sense.
Yeah.
So you're saying I'm equivocating. You're saying I'm equivocating.
A little bit.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. That's why I slipped the word desire. That's why I slipped the word desire in for the second use of it, because I think it's different. Because for us to have our own, it's not the same as saying we have the same wants as we have the same will, because we could do things that we don't want, but we still will it. We still allow it. So there's a difference between wants and wills.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, to be continued, because definitely.
I tell you what, this is going to actually make the part of this text that we're about to get into sing once we finally get into it. But Al still hasn't finished this point, so. So
let me try and trace it back, and I'll try to succinctly wrap it up in a way. But I think when we talk about principles, we're probably getting a little closer, I think, to the definition of what constitutes good and bad, right? But I think the problem we run into there is that I think we have to, how should I say, the existence of the principles have to be. It's just a larger question. It's more complex, because it's like, for example, how do you define the ethics of geopolitics, and also define the ethics of how we relate interpersonally, right? And those things, I think are it's not ontologically based, right? Because I think the problem here with Paul is that he's trying to infuse this ontological aspect to how the law is, or just in general, like what it means to be sinful, and like as you guys use that analogy between like the infinite chasm, right? That's been used so much by preachers to explain certain things that they're teaching, but I think the way you guys have described it doesn't allow for, or it doesn't really describe very well like how the sin violation equates to this cosmic scale violation, right? So like there are so many different ways that you can describe that chasm, and how and preachers would be selective in how to do it one way, but then the way that we have done it here, accurately describes how it can be seen this way. So there is no I'm trying to wrap this up in a good way, but he's infusing this ontology, but then he's infusing how this perspective can only be seen in a particular way. I guess that's what I mean. It's like it's such a narrow way to look at this.
It's a narrow way to look at humanity
without considering, without even bothering attempting to even just debunk other views of it that are just as valid as
so basically we become pigeonholed to his explanation of why the human being cannot do what he or she thinks they should do.
Yeah.
It doesn't even get into why you think you should or should not do that. It's
Yeah.
just the fact that you feel like you should or should not proves that you must have a law, and it also proves that you must be incapable of keeping that law.
Right.
It dawned on me that a lot of what Paul is doing is almost like a theological band-aid on the problem. He's dealing with the issue.
Exactly.
It sounds like he's digging deep, but he's dealing with a surface, because once you start asking questions about the premise for some of the things, yeah, because it's like what are you saying? Like all roads are leading back to Yahweh. You know, like when you start really looking at this situation and this whole conflict, we've said it time and time again, he's on both sides of this conflict.
Yeah.
You know, it's like he's arming Hamas and Israel. Like he's literally arming both of them in the situation. Like, you know, like he's the source of the issue. In fact, Paul is admitting it here in the text.
That was literal and figurative. That analogy was literal and figurative.
Both metaphysical and concrete at the same time.
He's adding fuel to the fire. He's like, you have a latent sin issue? And you're like, wait a second. Latent sin. I'm letting you know you have a latent sin issue. I'm going to add fuel to the fire, and I'm going to become the catalyst for the expression of that latent sin. So you have like you have certain things that are latent properties that won't be awakened unless certain. And he's saying, well, what is the awakening? What is the water? The water of the word is essentially what awakens your sinful nature.
Yeah.
So like you think about like the seeds being in the ground and you water it, and then the blades of grass come up. Imagine those seeds being sin that are just there and they're unexpressed, and the water of the word is just being. It's watering and then suddenly the sin starts to pop up. It's like, well, I thought you didn't want sin. No, I don't. But actually, this is playing a role. This is going to lead us to Romans 8. You know, so like we don't get to Romans 8 and 9 without this. You know what I mean?
So let's, in light of everything we just said in the last 12 minutes, now this section is going to actually sing. I only have one point I want to make, and I'm sure you guys have a point too. But let's just do this. He says, verse 14. We know that the law is spiritual. So don't try to put it on me like I'm dissing the law. We know that the law is spiritual. But you know what the problem is? Right here. But I am carnal, sold under sin. Sold by whom? Okay, let's not ask that. Sold under sin. I do not understand my own actions. I'm going to come back to verse 15 because that's going to be key. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. Once again, big up to the law. So then, it is no longer I that do it. So why am I being judged and sent to hell? It's no longer I that do it, but sin which dwells within me. There, once again, this abstract thing, where does it come from? What is it? I don't know, but it dwells with me. It's not me doing it. This thing, this alien principle dwells within me. Verse 18, for I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It is no longer I that do it. It's sin which dwells within me.
This is Brady. This is the most painful. I think this takes the cake. This is literally the most painful read I've had so far in Romans.
Why?
How many
Talk
times?
about why.
So I don't know how many times the audience, like when you hear Brady reading this, were you picking up on what Paul meant by I? And when he goes through each sentence, it's like, what is he like? He's literally changing the definition of I. I is constantly changing. So you have that problem from just purely from like, you know, a linguistic perspective, right? How did fucking break this down that way? But it's this now he's like doing like, you know, he's created this like what the fuck? It's like this
It,
Ouroboros. He's done an Ouroboros. He's done this literal like and when I say that, I don't mean that he's attaining some philosophical perfection because that's how Plato
mm,
and the ancient Greeks thought. Ouroboros in this really kind of demented way
mm,
because the subject matter is about who is responsible for the evil he does, and then what that does to your psychology. This is really
yes.
fucked up.
If
It's really
sin
fucked
is
up.
not a real entity,
Yeah.
then the dichotomy he's created between I and what's doing the sin that I do is a total mind fuck here.
Well,
Yeah.
Because
he's reified sin here.
mhm,
Yeah.
And for those who don't know what reification is, a simplistic definition would be to speak of something concretely as if something that's not concrete in a concrete way. So it'd be like, you can't fool Mother Nature, you know, something like that is reification. So when you're looking, and I'm not talking about in the logical kind of like argument sense, it takes on a slightly different connotation. But here, this is definitely when he's taking something that's very abstract
mhm.
and not very clear and speaking of it as though it were a concrete thing.
And not just
This
speaking of it
is
as though it's concrete, making it responsible for the evil that he doesn't want to do. It's one thing if you
it's
reify
almost a
Mother,
personification, right?
it's a personification indeed,
Yeah.
but the personification is responsible for evil in the world. I could
Yeah.
personify, you know, anything and make it responsible for, oh, the reason why I wore this is because, you know, the dark clouds, you know, they wanted me to wear black today. Okay, no harm, no foul. But if I personify sin and say it's the reason why I just killed my, you know, the person who delivered my package from UPS, like that's
The devil made me do it.
Yeah. The Maple did me do it.
it literally it's
Wow.
a step away from the devil made me do it. No, the devil didn't make me do it.
Right.
Sin made me do it.
Mhm.
And all of this
Which
is
seems
to
to be
get
abstracted, right? From the
It's
devil.
abstract.
Like sin
Yeah.
here is been abstracted even more, right?
all of this is exactly all of this is to get God and the law off the hook. God and the law are still good. I'm bad. And really, it's not even me because I'm God's creation. So I can't really be, it's sin that dwells within me. That's the bad thing. But who's going to be judged and sent to hell? Me. Why not just the sin that dwells? Why not just extract this abstract thing from me and judge that?
Yeah.
Unless it really is me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he doesn't really quite separate the sin from us. It seems like he's making it. He's using words like sinful nature or the flesh. So it seems like he's implying within the body. I know you didn't like the. I
Yeah.
guess you would consider somewhat a Platonic separation of the sinful nature from the body, but yeah, in the passage, I think it's the ESV used sinful nature, but the word is actually flesh. So it seems that he's saying that sin is somehow latent in the flesh itself, right?
And
Like,
I am
and
not
that
my
this,
flesh. I am not my body.
yeah, yeah,
Go
and
ahead,
that
Al.
somehow this is inherited, I guess, from Adam, or I'm not quite
It's either
sure.
inherited.
I'll be lying.
It's either inherited from Adam or it entered the world through him and spread to all.
Yeah, all human beings peculiarly. I guess not to
Right.
the animals so much,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Al, you
but
were going to say?
it's an ideology, right? It's an ideology.
It's an ideology. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just thinking through this and it's he's he's doing he sets up here's the thing, right? We all have like you know, every person individual who's honest with themselves can say like, yeah, there's, you know, I have good sides, you know, there are good sides to my personality, there are bad sides to my personality, right? You know, and you know, the better way that I have dealt with that personally is that you just come to accept it, right? And at the same time, it's a lot of the mental health kind of stuff that I do and that we all should be doing, I think, is to understand what we mean by bad.
Mhm.
And then in those individual cases of like that you can point out in your life, it's like you think about those things that you do in your life, things that you wish you could be better at. It's like instead of calling that sin or calling that the thing that is bringing condemnation to myself, right? I've had to switch that mental thinking,
Mhm.
right? And you switch that into thinking like, okay, well, this can be explained because I went through some trauma recently, right? Or this can
Right.
be explained because there are much
You
better ways to
find the
explain.
real culprit as
Right.
opposed to making up one.
Making up one. Correct.
That's what you're
And
talking about.
yeah, exactly. Instead of assigning this kind of ideological, mystical, magical thing that is fucking happening in your life and doing it, this thing that's embedded in you. It's almost like this like cancer is within you, but then you don't want to claim responsibility for it.
It's a
That's
spiritual
really,
cancer
yeah,
causing
right.
physical,
Physical,
issues in the real world.
yeah, right.
One of the reasons why I said this is the most dangerous passage in the New Testament is because, and this is the same thing that Jacob was just talking about, it ignores how complex human beings are.
Right.
So think about the conversation we just had about wills, right? Two contrary wills. Well, you don't even need two people to have two contrary wills. It's one thing when I want to be first and you want to be first and we're racing to be number one or whatever. And so whether it be who's going to get the job or who's going to get the last, this item's on sale and we're both shooting for it. And, okay, we can have competing wills there. And we might end up doing negative things to each other as our wills compete. Okay. We could just call that sin, or we could just say, no, human beings have desires and sometimes they conflict with each other. All right. But aside from having two competing wills in two different people, I can have two competing wills within myself. I can want to get an education and I could want to stack my money. If I get the education, I've got to deplete some of my resources. And in my own self, I can have two wills that compete. And so rather than doing the inner work of trying to figure out, oh, I need to prioritize these different desires within myself, it's nothing clever to look at a person and say, oh, this person who's addicted to meth, or this person who got in an abusive relationship and couldn't leave, it's the sin that dwells within you. See, you wanted to do what was good, but there was something else dwelling within your members, make you, no,
Yeah.
I'm a complex individual with competing desires. And if I don't prioritize those desires correctly, or if I prioritize them in a way that I put my happiness over my health, or I put my finances over my personal relationships, or I put my desire for freedom over my desire for safety, if I misprioritize, I'm going to find myself with consequences that somebody who's religious can look and say, see, it was sin that was dwelling in you that made you do what you shouldn't have done. No, sometimes I don't even, and Paul even says it, I think in verse 15? He says, I do not understand my own actions. Guess what? You're a human being. That's going to happen. You're going to do things that sometimes, and I thought I wanted this, but I guess I wanted that more. And rather than looking at the complex nature, he flattens everything out into this sin principle. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting how he brings up covetousness as a principle, and in the other Pauline book, 1 Corinthians, and I believe it was chapter 12, he admonishes the believers to covet the best spiritual gifts. So then now you've got a confusing, almost conflicting kind of message, because now you have you have to worry about, okay, how do I distinguish between a thing that is to be coveted, that's a good covetous desire, and the one that isn't? Like, so say for instance, you see your neighbor's house and your neighbor hasn't, like, so he says, covet the spiritual. Let's walk down that road just for a short period. You see another person using their spiritual gift, whether it's healing or teaching. I guess in this case, it would have been one that edifies the body. So teaching or helps or something like that. So you see another person operating within helps or teaching or encouragement, and you're like, I want that spiritual gift. So that's the one I should covet. Okay, you see a person's house. He has 4 kids. You happen to have 4 kids. You're like, his house looks like it's accommodating his 4 children and his wife. Well, I want that same kind of thing. Is that a bad covetous desire, or is it a good? So you basically set yourself up for future kind of the same kind of conflict that you're seeing in this passage. You set yourself up for going through life, having to, have these dude, I'm just gonna level with all of you listeners. When I left Christianity, one of the greatest benefits, immediate, you talk about Paul was outlining in, was it chapter 4, all of the benefits you get. You get reconciliation, you get propitiation, adoption, So here, I'm not going to give you a deepity. The biggest benefit that I got when I left the faith is to not have to psychoanalyze and cross-analyze everything that I was doing for every possible way. And just, I was able to just have a nice time. Back in the day, you might hear a joke and you think it was funny, but then you would be like, as a Christian, you'd be like, man, I shouldn't be laughing at this because it's a sinful joke. Or you might hear some music and you'd be like, oh, that's a bop. But I can't bop to that because
glorify God.
The most immediate benefit of putting this book down and being like, I'm done washing my hands, immediately I had just an ability to just live my freaking life.
Without
I didn't have to like
every desire, every thought, without having to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ and scan it through a million contradictory scriptures to see whether or not this desire passes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like trying to get something passed in Congress or something. It's got to go through that was my whole life. It's like, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Albert. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and fundamentally speaking, when you pointed out Paul saying, you should covet these things, then it's actually no longer a principle, right? Because he's filled in what X is. So now he's defined this morality as what we don't know, right? Is it a principle, or can actually content be filled within that principle, and is that the morality? And we don't know.
And somebody might
go ahead.
Somebody might say, well, he's saying don't covet your neighbor's house literally. So you can have a house like your neighbor's. But that even breaks down when you start cross-analyzing it, because you're like, okay, at what point is, you know what I mean? Like it does, and it's like, well, why could he say? Anyway, I don't want to undo the simplicity of what I preach the simplicity of the gospel to you guys. When you leave the faith, I'm preaching to you as though you're going to leave. When you leave, I'm not giving you a deepity. The first thing you're going to experience is being able to live your freaking life, guaranteed. You will be able to live your life.
Let me just make it more plain. It's not just live your life. Think your thoughts. To not have another imaginary person in your mind that is scouring with a frown at certain thoughts. No, you can think your thoughts. But then to Al's point, let me tie Jaywood and Al's point together. It's not just the ability and freedom to just live your life and think your thoughts and want your wants and all that. The other side of it is to be able to find the real motivations for why you desire the things that you desire. So that if you do think I have a bad side, or I'm snappy with people sometimes, or I'm not a morning person, but the things that you used to call, that's just the sin in me, and little by little, God's going to get that sin out of me. No, let me figure out why I'm like that. Why can't I be
exactly?
Why can't I be faithful in my relationship? I'm just a cheater. I'm just so sinful. I just keep cheating on people. Why am I like that? I had to trace a lot of my issues back to abandonment issues that I felt when my father left our family. There are ways that I don't want to get too personal.
You don't begin the project of life.
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't begin the project of living life until you leave the faith.
Exactly.
You haven't even begun. You haven't stepped over. Now, let me not overstate this. I think you can work on things just because you're a human being. And I know I don't want to overly simplistically present this, but I do think there's a real sense in which because so long as you have mythology and just fairy tales in between you and real life, you can't possibly be like, there are certain things that you're actually doing because you're alive, but maybe we could talk about your motives, the whole intellectual apparatus that is informing the way you are living your life is totally fictitious. It's total mythology. And so there's something to be said. It's unhelpful. It's unhelpful. So it's something to be said for dealing with life realistically.
Yeah.
Like I went to the aquarium and I looked at a seal. I was telling Brady the other day, and it was just like, wow. Like, because I don't have all of the trappings of ancient mythology, I was able to look at the seal and say, hey, it's not unfeasible that there were creatures that were in between being aquatic and land dwelling. Right. Like that, when you learn about evolution, you start learning about these things. And you're like, oh, look, he actually seemingly has 5-digit like divisions in his flipper. It's like, this is not something that's off the wall. Right. And so I'm able to just come to grips with reality and accept it for what it is, instead of like, nah, it's just incidental, like, and just kind of walking away from it. Like I don't have to have, the horse has the blinders on the side so he doesn't go nuts when he's going down the street. Like, as a Christian, you have those on, even if you don't know it. Yeah. You're walking through life with a Bible on one side of your face and a Bible on the other side, and you can't, you wouldn't dare try to engage your peripheral vision, because if you do, it's going to jeopardize your faith. So they got to keep you looking unto Jesus. Yeah, put the Bible there. Put the Bible there.
Wow.
So true, guys. So true. Wow.
All right. Well, we can wrap this up here. I think there's something we got. He wraps it up with these last verses. I'll put it back on the screen. Please take a minute, go back and listen to what we just said. I think there's a lot of help and health in what we just said. We did a whole episode on how Christianity is bad for mental health. Al talked about it, and I talked about going through therapy. Al was going through therapy. Me, was sitting in a class on a psychology class in Bible college, where I just realized how much more helpful clinical psychology can be than anything I ever got in my Christian life. And once you see those kind of things, you start realizing, wait a minute, chapters like this in Romans 7, it short circuits the process of healing, the process of knowing, the process of dealing with life. But let's go back in Paul's mind, verse 21. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inmost self. This is what Al was talking about. How many eyes are you talking about here? Well, in my inmost self, I delight in the law of God. But I see in my members, that is my body, another law at war within the law of my with the law of my mind, and making me captive to the law of sin, which dwells in my members. So now sin is a law that dwells in his members. And this is the verse in the RSV. The O is not there, but I like the old King James on this one.
Come on.
Oh, wretched man that I am. As a believer, didn't you find comfort in this passage, and specifically this verse? Because didn't it explain so much to you about why you can't stop cursing, or why you can't stop drinking, or can't stop smoking, or watching porn, or, oh, wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I of myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh, I serve the law of sin. Now, we don't even have to get into it, but there's a whole debate in Christianity about whether this is Paul looking back at his former self before salvation, or talking about his present condition as a Christian. But either way, this is Paul wrapping up the idea of what's going on in the human being. I can't even say if you are. Either this is before and after Christ, or this is still in Christ. You've got these two laws going on, one in your body, this other spiritual thing happening in your mind, where you get to serve the law of God through Christ. This can be your solution if you buy into his problem. If you no longer buy into his problem, this solution now begins to pale in terms of its ability to make you think this is what you need to live your life. Thoughts, closing thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bunch of BS. Like, like we have to reiterate that point that just as Brady did the recap, I believe it was last week, recapping all of the tenets that were set before us in the previous chapters. And he's like, we found these things not to be the case. Mm-hmm. Well, if Christ be not raised, as Paul himself has said, we're still in our sins, right? Mm-hmm. So he says, who will deliver me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, our Lord, right? If Jesus is a dead man, potentially, I mean, if he existed, if he's dead, how can he deliver you from some fictitious problem that you're having? Mm-hmm. It's an impossibility. And mm-hmm. What of the problem? If the problem itself is an artificial problem, if what he's presented you within this chapter is not a real problem, you don't have a problem to be delivered from. You don't have a body of death to be delivered from.
Yeah.
So I guess, just go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because it just, and everything we've talked about, just breaking this down, deconstructing this, and the fact that millions of people, maybe not millions, but at least many thousands of people have died over how they interpret this passage, right? Because, Luther had this kind of mind-body dualism kind of thing going on a little bit here, and Catholics don't, but because of that disagreement theologically, right, it turns into an entire catastrophe in Europe with 30 years war and everything. So I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. Like we have a terrible setup to a conclusion, a terrible conclusion too on top of that, and then you have people dying over this crap. Like this is fucking crazy. Yep. It's like
people dying over this crap, and then I want to keep reiterating the point that we just made. You have people not living over this crap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Lost a lot of years to this,
Mm-hmm.
And as the old song says, I'm going into the enemy's camp to take back. Come on, somebody. We over here trying to spread the good news. Bro, you don't have a body of death to be delivered from. You have no body of death. Bro, there is no, the man that you're looking to deliver you, he's dead, if he ever existed. He died 2,000 years ago, and guess what? He never got up, if he existed. So he can't help you in the matter. He can't help you in self-improvement. A dead man can't help you improve yourself.
Yeah.
You got to do that. You're alive.
A dead man can't help you improve yourself. Now, not to belabor this, because we're going on 2.5 hours here, but there are very many Christians, myself included, who could say, but it did help improve me. When I believe I went from making straight F's in high school to getting on the honor roll. I stopped cursing. My communication improved. I ended up with a career. I stopped disobeying my mother. I became more kind. So in a sense, didn't this dead man improve me? What would you say to that, Jay Witt? I love what you said. A dead man can't help you improve yourself, but didn't the dead man help me?
Yeah, the last part of my statement there got a little clipped. I said, you're alive, you have to do it. Okay. That's the other side of it,
Gotcha.
It's like if you're waiting for Jesus to deliver you from your problems and your personality, you may as well go into the graveyard and stand in front of graves there and expect some of those folks to help you be delivered from your personal problems.
Well, what makes Jesus important in this is, though, none of those people in the grave have the kind of story that's been told about Jesus, because what you end up having is Jesus as a useful lie. Because you're right. It is me. I'm the one who's still alive. I'm the one who, as Aunt Kathy just said, takes the personal responsibility to fix me, but I might need a focal point. I might need someone to look at as exemplar, as this story of somebody who gave themselves sacrificially. The idea of, there's a book called The Illusion.
And we gotta clip that, because what did Albert say at the beginning? He was pointing out the inherent misogyny in Romans 7. Like I hate the fact that Christians are constantly pretending this is the best that we can look to. There are better stories that we already have. We don't need to look to, we don't have to look to Romans 7 and all of its inherent misogyny to try to better ourselves. We can find better stories. They're already in existence. Even some of the Greek myths are better than some of the stuff you get in the Bible, for crying out loud.
Hey, greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friend. Where are you going to find a better story than God becoming man and then giving his life for you? If that doesn't win you over, even if it's not true, just that story alone has people like William Lane Craig. What did William Lane Craig say? If there's even just a 10% chance that this is true, I gotta believe it. So can this just be some people's useful fiction that if it gets people off of alcohol, if it gets them, to not leave their families, and can this just be the useful lie that we tell ourselves? Because even if the responsibility is on me, I may not have my own bootstraps to pull myself up by. I can use,
not if you believe that truth is inherently virtuous, and that is somewhat, and that principle is somewhat axiomatic. If you believe that, now granted, you don't have to agree with me on that. You might say, well, what's the basis for that philosophically? All right, sure. But if you actually believe that there's inherent value in knowing the truth, somebody said, the good book said the truth shall make you, come on, somebody. He didn't say it was going to set you free. He said it would make you free.
Make you free.
Now, if you actually believe, if you believe the truth is going to make you free, then believing this here truth is better than believing any lie that's useful.
I love it. I love it. Hey, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you can know when we go live. Drop a comment, go back to the actual video if you don't mind, please, and drop a comment or come back during the week. There was a lot said in this episode that I think will be very beneficial to meditate on. As you used to meditate on the scriptures, I think there's some very helpful thoughts here. But definitely thank you guys for rocking with us on a Sunday morning. Enjoy the remainder of your weekend. We will be back this coming Tuesday with exit strategy, the religious mind versus the scientific mind. And look forward to seeing you guys then.
Sounds exciting.
Much love, guys.
All right.
Peace.